Well, it's 5 after. I was hoping for a few more attendees. We're using a new system for those of you that are logging in. It's a webinar program and it might be a little difficult to use at times, but what I'd like to do is get started tonight and give you just a little background on how we'd like to conduct the meeting. If you have a question during the presentations, please raise your hand. At the appropriate time, we'll recognize you and let you ask. There's also a Q&A session that's open on this. If you have a question, would prefer to type it, there should be an icon at the bottom of your screen entitled Q&A. You can pose your question there and we can answer your questions at that time. So I have one hand up real quick and I'm going to go ahead and ask Robin. Robin, did you have a question? Robin, can you hear me? Robin McAllister?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. So I'm going to go ahead and mute yours. And once again, we're going to, if you have a question for the presenter, we'll go ahead and take the questions when they come up. So I'm going to go ahead and lower all hands for right now, and we'll talk about a couple of things real quick. So the first thing I wanted to do was give you an update. We held Shakeout here a couple of weeks ago, and we actually had a very good turnout. The overall participation was a little over 18% for the city, which was actually a little below what I hoped for, but it was above what we've done in previous years. So I'll take that as a win. We actually have a new, or not a new district, but we have new participation in our Little Cottonwood Creek district, and they came in with about almost 28% participation in their district, and they were the leading district for Shakeout 2021. Our leading precinct was our Cottonwood Heights 7th precinct, and they had a whopping almost 87% participation. So I've got to give a shout out to Andy up there and what she did with her group. So Shakeout went well. We learned a couple of quick things, but overall it was a good success. We're hoping that next year we'll be able to do an expanded Shakeout and we can go from there. So long story short, Shakeout 2020 was a success in my eyes. If you would like to see the actual results, go to the city website, cottonwoodheights.utah.gov. Go to the emergency preparedness page, and on the front page, you'll see a link in bold type there on the front page where you can actually view the report for each of the districts and each of the precincts. So I would encourage you to go there and see what you can do. So are there any questions about Shakeout? Raise your hands if you have one. I don't see any hands raised. I would like to give a shout out to Carlos Cardon and the chart guys. That's our radio group. They do a fantastic job. They spent weeks, if not months, preparing for Shakeout. And on their end, it went very, very well. Robin, what's your question? Robin McAllister, do you have a question for us? You'll have to unmute, sir. Okay. All right. The next thing I wanted to talk about is it's flood season. We've been very lucky the last couple of years. We haven't had any major issues. I was able to check with our forecasters at the Salt Lake County Flood Group, and they're telling me that we shouldn't have issues this year. In fact, they're projecting only a runoff of about half a flood stage. So knock on wood, with the long-term or long-range forecast, weather forecast, we're hoping things will be well. The problem with that leads into my second part, and that's our fire watch. We are coming into fire season. In fact, they've had several fires across the state already. So what I would ask you to do is you can go to the Be Ready Utah page. You can go to Firewatch or UFA's main page, and there's a lot of tips on the UFA page about preparing your home and preparing the gardens in anticipation of a significant fire year. What I would tell you to do is remember the term safe space. There should be a safe space of about 35 feet around your house to your landscaping that is weather or fire resistant. So take a look at that page on UFA's website. They have a lot of great tips, and I think that I'm hoping that we can keep things under control fire-wise this year. So anybody have any comments or any questions about flooding or fire preparations? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So what I would like to do is introduce our presenter tonight. We were asked to bring in somebody who could give us some training on personal and family communications during an emergency. And we're fortunate enough to have a great resource in Morgan Funk. She's with the Salt Lake Chamber, or the Salt Lake District of Red Cross. She is the, and I got to make sure I get this right because I wrote it down, the Disaster Program Manager. Did I get that right, Morgan?
You did. It's quite the mouthful.
A little bit, but that's okay. But Morgan is a great resource for us. She runs that program. If I need her in the middle of the night, I can call her and she can send resources our way. But tonight, what we want to do is talk about personal and family communication. So just a couple of rules about that. If you have a question, raise your hand and I will try and find an appropriate spot to let Morgan know that you have a question and we'll let you in. Or if you want to go to the Q&A section down on the bottom and type your question there, or you can use the chat and I will try and keep up on each of those if that makes sense. Having said all that, Morgan, please.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here tonight, Paul. As you mentioned, my name is Morgan Funk, and I am the Disaster Program Manager with the Red Cross. And a lot of words basically to say that my ultimate responsibility is to oversee all preparedness, response, and recovery efforts for the Greater Salt Lake City area chapter. And so I'm thrilled to be here today to discuss disaster preparedness. It's a passion of mine, and sounds like for the likes of you, share that passion and interest in ensuring that we're all more resilient in the face of disasters. I shared with Paul earlier that I'm going to turn my video off just during my presentation because my bandwidth here at our home, with all of us using it for work and school, is not that great. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to share my screen as I have a brief presentation for you guys here. And can I just get confirmation that you can see my screen?
Morgan, I can see your screen. You're full screen. We're in good shape.
Okay, perfect. So while I'm in a full screen here, I can't see if hands are raised or anything in the chat. So thank you, Paul, for monitoring that. Additionally, there's some times where I might be asking questions or offering you the opportunity to participate. In that case, please feel free to raise your hand, and I'd love to hear your feedback and your comments about the topics that we're going to be discussing. But essentially, this presentation that I brought to you guys today is focused on how to become what we call Be Red Cross Ready. And that really encompasses 3 sections. We really talk about getting a kit, making a plan, and being informed. And we have a specific emphasis tonight, as Paul mentioned, about personal and family communication planning that we're going to discuss. So the fact is that disasters happen. They happen often, they happen with little or no warning, and they happen anywhere and at any time. Every year across the United States, communities are facing disasters, whether that's hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, winter storms. Wildfires are burning thousands of square miles, and home fires are impacting thousands of households. Here locally, as Paul mentioned, we are really focusing now on flood season, or perhaps lack thereof, which then forces us to then focus our attention to wildfire season and ensuring that we're understanding the risks that we face with having that interurban facing wildfire threat that's here. Additionally, I know you all are very familiar with the threat of an earthquake in our area. So those are really the 2 most common disasters that we keep in mind when we're discussing how to become Be Red Cross Ready. Additionally, the largest disaster that Red Cross responds to every year across the United States are home fires. By and large, it is the largest disaster that we respond to. In fact, it accounts for all other disasters combined. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking of incidences that can occur in your community. In any of the disasters that we mentioned, a lot of people will assume that someone else will be there to help them. However, resources just aren't there to support everyone immediately. You know, first responders and disaster organizations, government agencies, and hospital emergency rooms are going to do their best, but on average, these groups are staffed and prepared for normal day-to-day operations, and resources may be limited during a disaster. And the truth is, we will have to depend on ourselves first. Why is that? It's because roads might be impassable, utilities might be unavailable, hospitals and first responders could be overwhelmed, banks, grocery stores, gas stations, pharmacies, schools, workplaces, other places that we depend on and rely on may be closed for days. So you may also need to help others in your household, such as or neighbors or those that might have different access and functional needs. But it's important to not count on receiving help from anyone right away. All of us can and should be prepared to help ourselves and our household. Will preparation be perfect? No. Will preparation make things quick, easy, and painless? Not always, but planning and preparing will help you be safe and recover quickly, which is very important. So does anyone have anything to share from your personal experience about what it means to be prepared?
Morgan, I don't see any hands up.
Comments? Okay, that's fine. No pressure here. It's a safe place, so feel free to jump in whenever you'd like. But when we are prepared, we can take protective action to be safe. We can react in the right ways, adapt to tough challenges, and recover quickly from difficulties. So when we're talking about being Red Cross ready, we have this kind of three-step motto of what does it take to be prepared. So first, you're going to want to get a kit. Your kit should contain the supplies you will need at your home or you can easily carry with you if you have to evacuate. You should identify the steps you will take to respond to specific disasters. For each disaster, you're going to also want to decide on who in your household will do what, where you will go, and how you will communicate with each other. Finally, it's important that you are informed. You're going to want to learn about how you will get information if a disaster occurs and what resources are available into your community. This will allow you to quickly respond to help yourself, your household, and your community. And now we're just going to look into each of these areas in a little bit more detail. So if a disaster strikes in your community, you might not have access to food, water, electricity, medical facilities, or even a drugstore. Preparing a disaster kit for your household is an important step to keep everyone safe and healthy during a disaster. If you can, I'd like you to consider assembling 2 kits of supplies. In one kit, put everything you will need to stay at home for at least 3 days. As you are able, work to gather enough supplies in this kit to last for 2 weeks. The other kit, which is often referred to as the go bag, should be a lightweight, smaller version that you can take with you if you have to leave your home quickly. It should contain everything that you would need to be on your own for 3 days. Based on the needs of the members of your household, this kit could be one for each person or one for the entire household. You're going to want to make sure that you customize the kits to meet everyone's personal needs and the disasters that are common in our area. So when you're thinking about your kit, consider what would happen if an earthquake were to happen and different elements have been impacted in our day-to-day lives, or a wildfire were to recur and you'd have to leave the area in which you live or the resources that you're used to having access to in your community. To build your kit, think about what you use on a daily basis and what you might do if those resources were limited or not available to you at all. So you're going to want to start with the basics: food, water, clean air, and any life-sustaining personal items of your household needed to maintain health, safety, and most importantly, independence. Basic supplies include non-perishable, easy to prepare food items, a manual can opener, and water. And remember that you may be without electricity and you may only have the amount of water that you have stored with you. Does anyone have an idea of how much water you think you need to store? Maybe you can pop some guesses in the chat if you'd like.
So Morgan, no hands up. It's going to be a long night if we don't get our
Yeah.
participants to weigh in.
Okay, I hope you guys don't get tired of the sound of
Oh.
my voice, but oh, good. Someone might have a comment.
Yep. Kurt, you're up, buddy.
A gallon per person per day.
Yes. Thank you, Kurt. Great job. You should have at least 1 gallon of water per person per day. And also, you're going to want to have half of that for drinking and half for sanitation. You may need to have more than this depending on the specific needs of people in your household or in the environment in which you live. So if you were to live, not necessarily doesn't get too hot here, but I grew up in Texas and I know having extra water, especially living in some of the most humid areas, is something really important to consider. Also, you're going to want to consider some other things to include in there, like including a flashlight and a battery-powered or a hand crank radio. You may also want to sign up in advance to receive emergency notifications from your local emergency services. The different cities have different apps. The Red Cross has emergency apps. Be Ready Utah has some apps that you can use. Great information technology that's available to us in our state to keep us informed. It's also important that you have extra batteries, a first aid kit, 7-day supply of medication and medical items. Also want to keep a copy of your prescriptions, those dosages and treatment information, a backup battery backup power for power dependent mobility devices, oxygen and other assistive technology needs. You also want to talk to your doctor or your pharmacist about other actions that you can take based on any sort of health conditions that you may have or concerns that you may have for medication supplies in the event of a disaster.
Morgan, we have a hand raised.
Yes, of course.
Carlos, you're up. Carlos? I just lost Carlos. I don't know where he went.
Well,
Oh, there he is, but
oh, hey.
hang on. Carlos, can you hear us?
Yeah, it's harder on this new system to find the unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, Morgan, I think you kind of answered my question with the last few sentences, but there are classes of medication that, to my knowledge, you really can't get spares for, and I wonder if you have comments about that.
That's a great point. And like you mentioned, spares, or there's so many medications that require a certain environment to be effective, right? Like they need to be refrigerated or they need to be kept in an ideal temperature controlled environment. So my advice to you for anything that you have medically where medication supplies or environment is essential to you being able to maintain your independence is share those concerns with a doctor or your pharmacist and talk about any other actions that you can take, any sort of supplemental medication that could be used during the times where you may not be able to utilize that medication that you normally use, or what advice they would give you to be able to help prepare better for that.
Thank you, Morgan.
Absolutely. Great question. Great question. Wonderful. Just a couple little things to cover. We also thinking about a multi-purpose tool, sanitation and personal items, copies of personal documents, such as your medication list that we discussed, important medical information, your proof of address, the deed or the lease to your home, your passports, birth certificates, insurance policies, things that are going to be important to take a look at. You also want to keep current digital photos of your loved ones, and remember to update these every 6 months, especially for children. I have 2 teenagers and they change faces, I feel like, every day. And it's really important, especially if somebody were to become separated or if you're looking for a loved one, that you have current photos of them. In these days, you want to have your cell phone and a charger, a household member and emergency contact information, which we're going to go into a little bit more detail from, extra cash, which if you're like me, I don't really carry cash too much these days, but we may not have access to our credit cards, debit card technology, or any other kind of digital wallet capabilities. You're going to want to have at least 1 emergency blanket and maps of your area. And remember, you may not have access to maps on your cell phones or your computers. So the good old-fashioned paper maps are going to be the best bet. And I know that all of this information can be overwhelming, but please don't feel overwhelmed by this list. Preparedness is a process that takes a little bit of time. So just consider building your kit just one step at a time. Maybe focus on adding a few items each week or each month, whatever your capability and capacity is until your kit is complete. And don't forget to make a kit for your pets or your service animals. Make sure to include food, water, identification tags, or other necessary supplies that they may need. No matter what's in your kit, it's important that everything works when a disaster strikes. So make sure that you check expiration dates of food, medicine, and batteries at least twice a year and replace anything that is expired or near expiration. So the Red Cross loves utilizing the time change as a method for testing and thinking about our emergency kits. So whenever you spring forward and you fall back, you change your clocks, test your smoke alarms, and take a look at your kit and make sure that everything is working properly and that nothing has expired. So we've talked about the essentials for the kit. Now I'm just going to talk briefly about how you might need to customize your kit based on specific needs of your households and the types of disasters that are possible in this area. For example, there are weather radios with text display and flashing alerts so that you can stay informed even if you're having difficulty hearing. So you'll want to always be able to store what you need in your kit. So collect the following items from around your home as soon as you become aware of potential disasters or if you need to evacuate. So we've talked about this a lot, but going to kind of re-emphasize the medical supplies. So any sort of like syringes, diabetic testing strips, catheters, anything that you would need medical equipment wise is going to be the number one. If you undergo routine treatment or receive regular services, make sure you're talking with your service provider about their disaster plan and what that can look like so you can incorporate that into your own. Any sort of assistive or adaptive devices, including supplies for your service animals, any communication boards or tablets, baby supplies, if that's relevant to your family, like bottles, formula, baby food, and diapers. We talked about pet supplies, but you'll want to consider their collars, leashes, bowls, food, and pet carriers, and an extra set of vehicle keys or house keys. And so those are kind of, a few of the things that we kind of talked about based off of various needs for your household. And just finally, a couple of additional items you might want to consider adding are a whistle, a respirator, matches, rain gear, towels, work gloves, tools and supplies for securing your home, extra clothing, and sturdy shoes. Any plastic sheeting so you can keep things dry in the event that you have to be outdoors, duct tape, scissors, household bleach, entertainment items or things that are going to bring you comfort when you're stressed out, like pictures or books, board games, things like that, a blanket or sleeping bag, and sunscreen and insect repellent. So like I mentioned, don't be overwhelmed by this list. These are just some ideas, and every kit's going to be customizable based off of your needs for your individual household. These may provide additional protection from the elements and ultimately help you recover more quickly, which is the ultimate goal following a disaster. So knowing the hazards likely for our area, you can now make a plan. So we've talked about, the kits that we need. We talked about the hazards that we face. And different hazards require you to take different actions. For example, we recently experienced that windstorm. So if we're, ever faced with a situation like that again, you're talking about moving to a basement or a storm cellar, an interior room on the lowest floor with no windows. For a home fire, everyone needs to evacuate immediately and meet at a designated safe meeting place. If you're talking about an earthquake, we just talked about that with the Great Shakeout, just so things that you understand what your reaction would be to a disaster. And make sure that you talk with everyone in your household about how to prepare for and respond to the hazards that are most likely to happen where you live, work, and play. If a household member is in the military or has extended business travel on a regular basis, you're going to want to plan how you will respond to them if they are away. Additionally, individuals with access and functional needs will need to prepare a bit differently. For those individuals, you'll want to create a personal support network that can help you plan and prepare assistance if a disaster happens. Remember not to depend on just one person for that. You're going to want to include a minimum of 3 people in your network that can support. You'll also want to complete a personal assessment of functional abilities and possible needs during and after a disaster. And make sure that you practice your disaster plans with your personal support network at least twice a year. So don't forget to think about what you will do with your pets. And that's the most common reason actually why people don't evacuate their homes, because of a disaster. And most American Red Cross shelters cannot accept pets because of health and safety concerns and other considerations. However, service animals are always welcome in a Red Cross shelter. So it's just important to contact possibly local emergency management agencies, or to find out any sort of pet-friendly shelters or services that might be available in the area if you needed to find sheltering for your pets. And now we're going to talk about the last part of being informed, which was specifically kind of emphasizing that family communication plan. So creating your family communication plan starts with really one simple question: what if? And these are really some common questions that are asked. What if something happens and I'm not with my family? That's a big one. Will I be able to reach them? How will I know that they're safe? How can I let them know that I'm okay? During a disaster, you will need to send and receive information from your family. Communication networks such as mobile phones and computers could be unreliable during a disaster, and electricity could be disrupted. So planning in advance will really help ensure that all the members of your household, especially children and people with various access and functional needs, and any caregivers, will know how to reach each other and where to meet up in an emergency. And planning really starts with 3 simple steps. So you're going to want to start with, one is collect. So you're going to want to create a paper copy of the contact information for your family and other important people, offices such as medical facilities, doctors, schools, or service providers. The Red Cross also has some of these emergency contact cards that we could provide. I can send this information to Paul. Additionally, that long list of possible kit information, I can also share that with you so you guys can take a look at that and start maybe marking some things off if you'd like. So once you collect all that information, the second step is to share. Make sure that everyone carries a copy of this information and in their backpack or purse or wallet. You should also post a copy of this in a central location in your home, like a refrigerator, or if you have a family bulletin board inside. And finally, you're going to want to practice. So you're going to want to have regular household meetings to review and practice your plan. And it's important to know that texting is the best. So if you're using a mobile phone, a text message may get through when a phone call will not. This is because a text message requires far less bandwidth than a phone call. Text message may also save and then send automatically as soon as capacity becomes available. So just kind of talking a little bit more about these areas and some information that you're going to want to collect. So it's important to write down phone numbers and email addresses for everyone in your household. Having this information written down will help you reconnect with others in case you don't have your mobile device or your computer with you, or if the battery runs down and you're unable to charge it. If you have a household member who is deaf or hard of hearing, or who has a speech disability and uses traditional video relay services, please include information on how to connect through relay services on a landline phone, a mobile device, or computer, and just make those considerations when you're collecting information. Because a disaster can strike during school or work hours, you need to know what their emergency response plans are and how to stay informed during an emergency. You're going to want to discuss these plans with children and let them know who can pick them up if there's an emergency. Make sure your household members with phones are signed up for alerts and warnings from their school, your workplace, or your local government. For children without mobile phones, make sure that they know that they are to follow instructions from a responsible adult, such as a teacher or principal or someone who's in charge at their school. It's also important to identify someone outside of your community or state who can act as a central point of contact to help your household reconnect. In a disaster, it may be easier to make a long distance phone call than to call across town because local phone lines can be jammed. You'll also want to decide on safe, familiar places where your family can go to for protection or to reunite. Make sure that these locations are accessible for all household members. And if you have pets or service animals, consider animal-friendly locations. So we're really going to want to talk about 4 areas that you're going to want to identify. So first is the indoors. If you live in an area where, high wind storms can happen, which we all know that they can because we experienced that this past year, make sure everyone knows where to go for protection. Similarly, if there's an earthquake, what they're going to do in various rooms of their home. So, for example, it could be going into a small interior windowless room, such as a closet or a bathroom on the lowest level of a sturdy building, or a storm shelter if that's applicable to your home. You also want to find a place in your neighborhood. So this can be a place where your household members will meet, if there's a fire or another emergency that you need to leave your home. Wildfires is a great example for something like this as well. So this meeting place could be, the mailbox that's at the end of the street, or a neighbor's house, or it can even be the big tree. If there's a home fire, there's a big tree in your neighborhood, and that would be a central location where everyone knows that they can meet. Also, you're going to want to think of something possibly outside your neighborhood in the event that there's a larger wildfire that requires you to exit your neighborhood. So this will be a place where your family will meet if a disaster happens and maybe you're not home or you can't get back to your home. This could be a library, a community center, a house of worship, or a family or friend's home that might be outside of your neighborhood. And finally, you're going to want to consider some place outside of your town or your city. So having an out-of-town meeting place can help you reunite if a disaster happens and you cannot get home or to your out-of-neighborhood meeting place, or if your family is not together and your community is instructed to evacuate the area. This meeting place could be the home of a relative or a coworker, family, or friend. Make sure everyone knows the address of the meeting place and discuss the ways in which you would get to that place. Finally, you should also write down phone numbers for emergency services, your utility service providers, your medical providers, your veterinarians, your insurance companies, and any other services that would be pertinent to your recovery. So now we're going to talk a little bit about sharing. So we've collected all of this information. Now it's important that we share it. So you're going to want to make copies of your emergency communication plan for each member of your household to carry, like I mentioned, in their wallet or purse or backpack, and post that in a central place in your home. Regularly check to make sure that the household members are carrying their plans with them. You also want to enter household and emergency contact information into all household members' mobile phones or devices. And also store at least one emergency contact under the name in case of emergency, or ICE, as we also refer to. This will help someone identify your emergency contact if needed. And you're going to want to inform your emergency contact of any medical issues that you may have or other requirements that would assist you in recovery. Make sure you create a group list on all mobile phones and devices of the people you would need to communicate if there was an emergency or disaster, and make sure all household members and your out-of-town contact know how to text if they have a mobile phone or device, or know alternative ways to communicate if they're unable to text. Remember, we talked about texting as being a best way. Make sure that everyone knows how to do that on their phones. And also to make sure to sign up to receive emergency information. Like we mentioned, several services that are available to you, so you make sure that you're able to stay informed. So now that everyone has access to those communication plans, it's really important to practice. And here are some great ideas where you can practice your plan. So I know it might sound silly, but practice texting and calling these individuals that you're going to be counting on as part of your plan. Have each person practice sending a text message or calling your out of town contact and sending a group text on your mobile phone list so you can ensure that everyone knows what to receive that. Discuss what information you should send via text. You'll want to make sure that you let others know that you're safe and where you are. So keep it short and simple, like I'm okay, I'm at the library, we are good, things like that. You'll also want to decide who will be the lead person to send out information about the designated meeting place for the household. And practice gathering all household members at your indoor and neighborhood emergency meeting places. Talk about how each person would get to the identified out of neighborhood and out of town meeting places, and discuss all modes of transportation that you can use. So it could be public transportation, rail or paratransit for all family members, and make sure that you're considering anyone in your household that has various access and functional needs. Regularly have conversations with household members and friends about the plan, such as whom to text and how to do that and where to go. It's kind of funny to show why it's important to keep phone numbers written down. I encourage you to challenge your household members to recite important phone numbers from their memory. Now ask them to think about doing this in the event of an emergency and see how well they do. Make sure everyone, including children, knows how and when to call 911. You should only call 911 if there's a life-threatening emergency during a disaster. And then you're going to want to review, update, and practice your communication plan at least once a year or whenever any information changes. So we talked about that twice a year for different aspects of keeping your kits put together and expired. We talked about that for testing smoke alarms and changing your clocks. And just make sure you incorporate your communication plan into those points as well. Wonderful. So I know we talked about a lot of information today. I just want to make sure that you don't forget about all the tools that are available for you, for your loved ones, and your community, and that are there to help you prepare for disasters. So make sure that you're, like we talked about, know what disasters are most likely going to be in your area. You're going to want to use any sort of contact cards to make sure everyone in your household can reach someone if a disaster strikes. Download the Red Cross emergency and first aid apps to your mobile devices. These apps can provide you with vital information in the event of a disaster. They're both free and they're available on the Just App Store and Google Play. And just like with your plan, you're going to want to practice all of your communication efforts and everything that you do. And it's also good to consider having somebody, at least one member of your household, train in CPR and first aid. It's a good best practice to have as well. So that's really the information that I have for you today. I know it was a lot of details and some things that we went over that might, like I mentioned, seem overwhelming. Don't let these plans overwhelm you. Like I mentioned, small steps at a time. The Red Cross is here to help you with a variety of resources and lists of items that we discussed today that should be included in your kits and that should be communicated in your communication plans that we would be happy to share with you. The Red Cross is always here to help support you, and also consider taking any sort of Red Cross first aid classes or becoming a Red Cross volunteer. We have a lot of opportunities to engage in our community to help our communities prepare, respond, and recover for disaster. If you'd like any more information on anything that we discussed today or any other resources that American Red Cross provides, you can always check out redcross.org. I'll also drop my email address in the chat so that way you, and my phone number. So if you guys have any specific questions or concerns or would like more information outside of this meeting, you'd be welcome to reach out to me personally. But that's all I have for you guys today. I'm just going to kind of open it up now for any questions or comments that anybody might have.
So I'm not, oh, Robin McAllister, you're up. Go ahead, Robin.
I have found on the website and or on the internet on various websites, excuse me, much of this same information. And for someone like those of us involved here as who have responsibilities to learn and teach the preparedness. My question really is, how do you motivate the ordinary person out there to take seriously these efforts?
Morgan, do you have any suggestions? I have a
Isn't that
comment.
just the question of the century, right? Why should I care? That's what we're trying to make people understand. And I think that the easiest way to make somebody understand the importance of it is relating it to what as localized as possible. So talk about things that have already happened. I mean, what a year we have had in our community. Not only were we faced with a unprecedented pandemic, but we had an earthquake, a windstorm, and wildfires, all on top of regular home fires that happen on an everyday basis within our communities. So I think that in talking about those things that have happened and that we know will continue to happen might encourage some folks to do that. We did see that after an incident like the earthquake, more people were purchasing, those 72-hour kits and having those considerations of like, hey, maybe I should start doing that because they talk about this earthquake and it finally happened. So keeping those local hazards at the forefront of conversations is always a good motivator. And also just being what you guys are already doing, that leading by example, taking steps to ensure that you have a kit, you have a plan, and that being informed component can also be informing your community members. So sharing this information with them, passing out, Red Cross has different pamphlets and flyers that we can give you. If there's ever an opportunity at community groups where you can share, hey, if you're ever considering making your emergency kit, here's some best practices items that you should include in those kits. And just start there, start small, start simple, and as localized as possible would be my best advice to get started. But it is the ultimate question of how do we get people to care. I don't know if Paul has other feedback on that.
Let me wade in. So Robin, that is truly, we're the most apathetic group of people at times. Because it doesn't directly affect us, right? I thought that little thing called an earthquake that happened last March 18th would be a polarizing event, but that didn't generate the interest that I thought it would. So let's just talk a little bit about how you, an individual, need to take care of yourself. We in emergency management here in the city of Cottonwood Heights, in the county and at the state level, we don't have stuff to send you right away. It's got to be a ground up process by you and those that you're responsible for. So remember, the first rule is take care of yourself. The second rule is take care of your family. And then the third, take care of your neighbors. If you remember that we are not coming, when I say we, the government's not coming to rescue you. There's not going to be a phone system for you to call 911 and say, I need help. It's going to be down. If you're not self-sufficient, you're going to be in trouble. And so what I like to tell people is, I'm not coming. You need to be prepared. Now, we will get to you eventually, but it will take time, days, maybe weeks. So let's make sure that you inform them that it's their responsibility there to be ready themselves. Does that make sense? So take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your friends, because nobody's coming for a few days. But we will come, but it's going to take some time.
Okay, one other comment, if I may. Half of the Royal Farms apartment complex is within the precinct that I live and that I'm responsible for. And this last shakeout was the first one that on my map included the Royal Farms as a block number. And my section of that is approximately 170 or 75 apartments. I made several contacts with the management over there to see what could be done about informing the residents of the Royal Farms apartments. And they stood by their no soliciting ground rules. What they let me do was post a bulletin in their, what they call the Amazon Center, which described this. And I actually called block captains and gave them ribbons. And with the information that I posted on the board, said any resident wishing to participate in this, contact this block captain. That was the only method of contacting them that I was allowed. And there were 0 calls from the residents in my section.
That it truly is a problem with our more transient populations, which are apartment residents, right? So one of the things that we can do, Robin, and apartment complexes from day one have been a problem for us. If you would like to reach out to me next week, I would be happy to, with you, we can go over and have a chat with the management over there and see if we can bypass those regulations, all in the name of public safety. So maybe my title and your willingness to be engaged with them will get us through that front door. So give me a call next week. We can make at least attempt to do that. And then ultimately, remember, it falls on them to want to be involved. But it goes back to the motivation, and I appreciate your efforts there. That's huge. It really is. So call me next week and we can have a discussion and see if we can get something done.
Okay, Paul, it might have to wait beyond next week. The manager, the person that really made the decision, was out on maternity leave over the past number of weeks.
Okay.
And the person in charge in her absence refused to give me her phone number. So
Okay.
There's no direct communication between me and the person who's actually has to make the decision. So until she gets
Okay.
back from maternity leave, we may be on hold.
Let me know. We can still actually go over and make contact with the, I don't know, the assistant manager, the temporary manager. I'm willing to do that, but just give me a call next week. Let's talk and see if we can strategize. Does that work? All right.
Yes.
Who else has a question? Looks like Kurt, you're up. Go ahead, Kurt, unmute and you're up.
When you guys get together, our precinct has the other half of those apartments that Robin was mentioned. So certainly include me, and we will see if we can make some inroads there. So
Perfect.
we'll hammer away at them, Robin.
Perfect. I love it when we can tag team these things. More might, the better. I'll bring a badge and a gun. You guys bring your efforts and we'll make this thing happen. Does that work? All right. Who else has got a question? Anybody? I just got a new one. Hang on for a second. I got to find who that is. It is Debbie McIntosh. Debbie, welcome and go ahead.
So can you hear me?
Yep, we got you, Debbie.
Okay, awesome. My question is there any way for us to get some of those great lists that she had?
Yeah, I'll have her send them to me and I'll get them distributed. Absolutely.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation.
All
Thank you. I'm glad
right.
it was helpful. I appreciate your engagement.
Okay, anybody else have a question? Oh, hang on. Debbie must be at a baseball game.
Like Debbie is multitasking.
I love it.
Classic
All right.
mom, right?
Okay, who else? Anybody else for a question for Morgan before we send her on her way? All right, well, Morgan, thank you so much for the presentation tonight. It was absolutely very informative. I would like to just make a couple of quick comments about what Morgan said. The first thing is,
watch the ball.
oh, hang on. Okay, she's muted again. Somebody must have scored. So one of the things that we all rely on is that little thing called a cell phone. And that is not going to be available if we have a large event such as an earthquake. But the other thing is, if we have a localized fire, we're also going to have those same issues. The machine gun fire about 8 years ago out in Harriman shut down their cell phone service. The one thing that Morgan touched on, she said, texting is best. And it truly was. At the machine gun fire, the only way they got messages through was on texting. So make sure that if you have somebody in your district or your precinct or your block that is not well versed in texting, make sure they can do that. Make sure they understand how to do that. Number two, when you look at communication up and down the chain, we're very fortunate in this city. We have the radio group that Carlos heads, and we actually have great communications up and down the line via radio. It might not be personal communications, but we do have a way to distribute information from us and receive information from you. So I would suggest that you become very familiar with your precinct communication specialist or your district communication specialist if you're a precinct leader. Know who those people are and stay in close contact with them. Find out where they're going to be, where are they going to be during an event like that. It's critical that you know where those communication pieces are and who they are. So when we have those types of issues, we can answer that. I just saw Carlos raise his hand, so I'm going to unmute him. Carlos, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me now, Paul?
Yeah, we got you, Carlos. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, it might be interesting for people to know there will be available potentially amateur radio networks kind of nationwide on a, who knows what basis. But what I would suggest to the folks in this group is the first 2 or 3 hours, we're going to be busy gathering information for Paul and his team. But once that information flow slows down a little bit, we would be able to send messages through this amateur radio network to let families know how you're doing, to inquire about well-being and that sort of thing. So be aware that we have that capability, not in the heat of the early stages, but perhaps a little later in the process.
That's great information, Carlos. The other thing I would tell you is that at some point when resources become available, we as a city will set up either information distribution points. It could be, at the location up at the rec center. It could be at City Hall. It could be at a local school. We don't pre-select those locations because we don't know which buildings will be available. But that information center would have the ability to distribute information on a large scale, but also we would allow people to post, little post-it notes or postcards saying, hey, it's John Doe, and everybody's fine in this family. If you're interested about us, we're at this location, etc. It's just a little clearinghouse for information. We also may set up a reunification center or a location at that same location. That's where if we have people that have nowhere else to go, we anticipate a short-term duration where they don't have somewhere to go. They could meet family members there that are coming to pick them up. So those are in the works or in the plans. But once again, that isn't going to happen initially. Carlos was very generous saying, it'll be a few hours. What it realistically will be is a few days. Plan on taking care of yourself for a few days. That's why this personal communication and family communication component is so critical. Make sure those young adults have access to the plan like Morgan talked about. Written, digitized, do both so that they know where to go, where they're expected to be. And remember, when the big one hits or when the emergency starts, people lose their minds. They forget. If it's not written down, they might know that the rally point is, Grandma B's house somewhere, right? Make sure they have it in a written form and in a digital form on the phone so there's no question where it is. Does that make sense? All right, more questions. All right, we're just about out of time. I want to pass on some information for everybody. One, I appreciate you being here tonight. It was a weird format. I'm probably going to go back to a Zoom meeting. Those are easier for people to get in. But number two, we have our next training session will occur on August 12th. We're going to bring in members of the trainers from Dominion Energy, Rocky Mountain Power, and I'm hoping to find somebody who does home generators that can give us some education on what to expect, what to do, what not to do with your utilities, specifically those that provide power and gas, should we have the big emergent event. So put that on your calendar, 7 p.m., August 12th. I hope to do that one in person. We will see. CDC released, yeah, exactly, right, Morgan? Cross your fingers. If you've been vaccinated, CDC said today that you don't have to wear a mask anymore, except under some very tight, stringent conditions, such as being on a bus, in a subway, some of that type of stuff. So cross your fingers, August 12th, 7 p.m. Does anybody have any additional questions? Anything we need to discuss before we call it a night? Not seeing any hands. We may have answered every question. All right. Thank you once again for your attendance. Morgan, thank you for being here. I will get Morgan's information out as soon as I get it from her. We'll distribute it, and we're going to go ahead and call it a night. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. I appreciate it. We'll talk to y'all soon.
Good night, all.
Good night.